For this week, we're going to start off by talking about race and ethnicity. This is chapter 12 in your textbook. It's called Social Stratification in your textbook. So we're going to talk about how we understand social stratification, and usually we can talk about that in terms of race, ethnicity, class, and caste. Okay. So then what is race? Your textbook defines race as a subgroup of the human population whose members share a greater number of physical traits with each other than they do with other subgroups. Okay, and that's kind of a pretty broad definition. And I think, personally, I feel that gives a little bit too much emphasis on, or it implies a greater biological difference than there actually is. So I prefer a definition like the second one you'll see there, which is a concept that organizes people into groups. Yes, this is much more broad, but I like the idea that this definition emphasizes that race is a concept as opposed to an actual thing that has some biological basis. Okay, in the United States and in Western countries specifically, we really like to think about race as something that's biological. It's built into humans. You are one race or you are another, and it's less something that's fluid or is socially constructed in our minds than it is in other cultures. So when teaching in the Western world, I like to emphasize that race is actually not very biologically based, right? They're obviously, because we can see phenotypic characteristics or outward characteristics that are different, it does make it seem very strongly biological or completely biological in nature. But in reality, race is a concept, it's a social construct. It helps us to organize people into groups. Usually race utilizes specific physical traits, okay, and we tend to think that those reflect fundamental differences in groups of people. Okay, and that's where we get into the biological notion. We like to think that because we can see outward physical differences, that must mean there is biological difference, but not just biological difference, but a difference that indicates some larger difference. So we like to think these physical traits indicate deeper or more fundamental differences between races, when in fact they don't. And you can think about this historically. We would think of, let's say, people of African American descent or people who we would categorize as black as being less intelligent, things like that. Right? So this is a historic example of using race and the presence of physical differences to reflect fundamental or innate differences in people. Okay, and this is what's wrong with the concept of race. It implies these very fundamental differences that don't actually exist. Okay, and that's why I like that second definition there for you, the concept that organizes people into groups. It just emphasizes the non-biological nature of race. Okay, and then the American Anthropological Association has a statement on race, okay, that is there at the bottom for you. And really what this shows is just reiterating that same concept, that race has always carried this meaning that goes beyond physical differences. Okay, it implies social differences or intellectual differences. Okay, but that isn't true, right? That's not grounded in scientific fact or in actual data. Okay, but this concept of race always seems to carry this heavier or deeper meaning. Okay, but as we work through and we talk about race and ethnicity and gender, class, and caste, I want you to keep in mind that all of these things are like race. They're not biologically based, rather they're socially or culturally based. Okay. So when we're talking about race, how do we actually categorize race? The United States, so think about how you would categorize race as someone who lives in the United States. If you grew up in another culture and emigrated here, then think about maybe how race was defined differently in that culture as opposed to this one. Okay, so kind of brainstorm a little bit. What do you think? How do you think we categorize race in the United States? Okay, would it be trait-based, so based off of physical traits, geographic, and of where you live, adaptational, or reproduction-based? Okay. So trait-based categorization. So this is going to take specific physical features and use that to divide people into races. Okay, and what this does is it basically takes an aggregate, so it takes an average of a large group of people, creates a stereotype basically, and then we would use that to categorize people into those different races. So usually things like head size or shape, skin color is a big one, body structure, lip, eye, nose, and mouth shape, all are used as these physical traits that indicate, right, in air quotes there, indicate a different race. Okay, so Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, so he came up with 5 groups: Mongoloid, Caucasoid, Negroid, Malayan, and American Indian. And so these were the 5 categories he came up with. And those are based on physical characteristics, nose shape, head size, skin color, and body structure for those. In the United States, hopefully you came up with this on your own, but we have 4 groups. A previous textbook I've used uses these 4 categories, and this seems kind of jarring to see white, black, red, and yellow. But we use skin color to organize people into racial categories, and these are the 4 primary racial categories we use. And while you would never in polite company, or hopefully ever, refer to someone as yellow, we do use a more yellow pigment in the skin to indicate a different racial category. Okay, so in the US we have 4 basic racial groups. You don't tend to think outside of white and black racial groups, but we do technically have the 4 that we will categorize people into. And this is clearly trait-based, right? It's based almost completely on skin color, how we organize people into races. Now, something interesting happens when you have, let's say, someone who might identify as African American or black, but they have very light skin. So then you might be, we really like to put people in these categories. So you might say someone could be confused or unsure of a racial category, and then you might default to other characteristics such as hair texture, facial features, or body structure. But primarily we use skin color in the United States to organize based on race, and that is a type of trait-based categorization of race.